I opened my company's HR software last week and found my own attendance turned into a color: blue, green, yellow, red. Not a metaphor, an actual color, assigned to me for showing up. So here's the question I couldn't shake. If a color on a dashboard can decide whether you get promoted, is that dashboard actually measuring culture? Or is it measuring something else and calling it culture because that sounds better in a memo? If it's genuinely about collaboration, the people pushing back on 5 days a week are just resisting a legitimate ask. But if it's about visibility and control, the culture language is doing a job, covering for something that would sound a lot worse said plainly. Either way, you're getting sorted by it. Being physically together makes teams work better. Faster feedback, tighter collaboration. It sounds so obviously true that nobody writing these memos feels like they need to prove it. So I went looking for the study. The one every return to office announcement is quietly leaning on when it says we work better together. I couldn't find it. What I found instead was language. Novo Nordisk announced a 5-day mandate the same week it cut roughly 9,000 jobs and called it belonging. Instagram ordered its US staff back 5 days a week and called it winning culture and creativity. Neither memo cited a single number. If you've ever read one of these announcements and thought, wait, where's the data? You weren't missing it. There isn't one. Meanwhile, the actual research keeps landing in the same place. Researchers at the University of Pittsburgh studied S&P 500 companies that rolled out return-to-office mandates and found the same result twice over. Employee satisfaction dropped, and nothing about the company's actual performance, profitability, stock returns, the numbers a board actually watches, moved either direction. Not up, not down. If the office really were the productivity engine the memos describe, you'd expect to see it somewhere in that data. You don't. Then there's the study that controls for the one obvious objection, that maybe the companies mandating RTO were already struggling, and the mandate is a symptom, not a cause. A randomized trial at a major company split 1,600 employees between hybrid and full in-office, not by choice, by coin flip. So nobody's self-selecting into the group that was already going to perform better. No difference in performance reviews. No difference in who got promoted. Zero. Not a small effect you could argue away with a footnote. None. Full stop across 1,600 people who didn't get to pick which arm of the experiment they landed in. So the productivity case isn't there. But that alone doesn't prove anyone's watching you on purpose. Maybe the companies writing these memos are just bad at citing their own reasoning. I needed to know what was actually driving the decision, not just what wasn't. But it turns out you don't have to guess. In a survey of over 1,500 managers, nearly a third, 32%, just said it outright. Tracking employees was the actual goal. Not culture. Tracking. That's from the same survey where 25% of C-suite executives admitted they were hoping some employees would just quit once the mandate landed. Not underperformers, just fewer people to manage. The culture language dissolves the moment you ask the people writing the policy what it's actually for. I went back and reread the Dell rollout the way an employee would have read it that week. Dell tracked badge-ins and VPN logins and turned them into a color, blue to red, sitting right there in the HR system. And fully remote employees were told outright, ineligible for promotion. Not less competitive, ineligible. A color decided that. I pictured getting that memo on a Monday, an email with your name on it, and next to it, one word, ineligible. Then I checked whether this only happens at struggling tech companies looking for a reason to shrink. It doesn't. California's governor raised the in-office requirement for state workers from 2 days a week to 4. No new agreement with their unions. No negotiation first. The unions filed a formal complaint, and the state's own labor board found enough merit in it to send the case to mediation. No profit motive anywhere in that room. Which means the business case was never really the explanation, even in the one place you'd expect it to hold up. You can watch the same pattern with a badge reader in your hand or a legislature's checkbook. It doesn't matter which. Which means this isn't really about badge readers. It's about your career, your paycheck, your standing on a team. And what this quietly costs you is concrete. A color you didn't choose and can't really contest, deciding whether you move up, while the actual justification for it keeps failing every time somebody checks the data. So if the control motive is real and the productivity motive isn't, the honest question isn't whether return to office works, it's why it keeps getting relaunched anyway. And that turns out to be more complicated than companies are just lying. Here's the honest complication. The control motive is real, and it's dominant, but it's tangled up with one genuine, narrower reason that gives it cover. Researchers at the Federal Reserve Bank of New York looked at software engineers at a Fortune 500 company and found that sitting near your teammates does produce something real, about 18% more coding feedback. But that gain isn't spread across the workforce. It's concentrated almost entirely in the youngest, least experienced people, the ones who still need someone to look over their shoulder and say, no, not like that, like this. The same research team went further. They estimate the shift to remote work explains roughly 64% of the recent rise in unemployment among young college graduates. Not because junior people got worse at the job, because companies stopped wanting to hire people they couldn't physically mentor. That's not a conspiracy. That's an actual line item on someone's coaching budget. The cost of a senior engineer glancing over, catching a bad assumption before it ships, instead of finding it 3 weeks later in a post-mortem. It's also, conveniently, never mentioned in the same breath as the color rating. Nobody's memo says, we need you 5 days a week because Chen is 2 years in and still learning to read a stack trace. They say culture. Chen just gets swept up in the same policy as everyone else. So lay the two things next to each other. A real, narrow, defensible case. Put junior people in a room with someone who can correct their work in real time. And a company announcing a 5-day mandate the same week as 9,000 layoffs, citing belonging, with nothing else attached. Same pattern as Instagram's winning culture memo. No numbers, because there aren't any to cite for the broad version of this claim. Only for the narrow one. So, is it culture or is it control? Mostly control. The 5% genuine case, the one about getting junior people real feedback, is what gets pointed to every time a company needs cover for the 95% case. Watch people, sort them, hope some of them leave, and almost no return to office memo tells you which one you're actually being asked to accept. Here's what I want you to take from this. Stop asking whether a company is saying culture or control. That's the wrong test, because every memo says culture. Ask what the policy would look like if it were actually about mentorship, and whether the one in front of you looks anything like that. A real mentorship case names who benefits, junior staff specifically, and stays scoped to them. A control case borrows the same 4 words every time. Culture, belonging, collaboration, connection. Those words pull better than, we want to watch you and we're hoping some of you leave. Nobody writes, we'd like to monitor you more closely on a Tuesday morning slide. They write culture. It reads better in the deck. If I were you, the tell isn't what the policy says, it's what it measures, and what happens to you if the number comes back wrong. Because if you don't ask, you eat whichever version they hand you, including the version where a color on a dashboard, not the work you actually did, decides what happens next. Here's the one thing worth doing differently. The next time your company rolls out an attendance policy, ask, out loud, in the meeting, on the record, what specific outcome it's supposed to move, and how they'll know if it didn't work. You probably won't get a straight answer, but watching whether they even try to give you one tells you which of the 2 policies you're actually looking at. So back to that color on my dashboard. Blue, green, yellow, red. It was never really measuring whether I was collaborating. It was measuring whether I was visible. The badge reader can't tell the difference between someone building something next to a mentor who's teaching them and someone just making sure the light stays green. That's the whole story, reduced to one color nobody chose. That's the memo. Read.